Hello, listening audience. This is Michael Cross here with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where we like to ask the questions that the mainstream media often fails or doesn't want to deal with. Tonight, we have a very, very interesting guest. His name is Hen Mazzig, and he's with an organization known as StandWithUs. And, well, I'm just going to let him go into this. Thank you for coming on the show, Hen. Tell us a little bit about your organization and what its goals are.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure. StandWithUs is an organization that was funded 14 years ago. Our mission is to educate about Israel. We feel that there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about Israel, about the Jewish state. And our goal is to educate. We believe that education is the path to peace. And we are working with the younger generation, with students on high schools, on college campuses, and in communities as well. We have 17 offices around the world. We have 2 headquarters. One is in Jerusalem, where I work as the Israel Education Director, and we have another headquarter in Los Angeles. We also have offices in London, in South Africa, and representatives in South Africa. In Shanghai, we just opened a new office. But we're trying to bring people the facts. We believe that in order to have a real conversation, people need to know the facts. Although many people don't want to get confused with the facts, we're trying to bring the honest truth to the public and
Yes?
Michael?
Yes, I lost you there for a second.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Just continue.
I'll start about StandWithUs from the beginning.
No, you can just go ahead. We just lost a couple seconds there. Just essentially, okay. You're talking about bringing facts out, and I originally became acquainted with the organization because I saw some information about history of an event that took place in 1948. And could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that have happened that people aren't really aware of right now?
So are we talking about the creation of Israel or about the Jewish refugees from Arab countries?
Yeah. The thing is, in the press, we hear a lot about the situation as it relates to Palestinians.
Right.
But it seems that a lot of people aren't aware of expulsions that took place of Jews.
Mm-hmm. We hear a lot about Palestinian refugees and about how many Palestinians were left Israel upon its creation, but we don't hear about the other group of refugees. While many Palestinians fled the war that was launched against Israel, a war that was launched by the Arab countries surrounding Israel. We're talking about 6 different countries from Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan, and with support of the Arab League, launching a war against Israel. And it wasn't a war to get to get some more land or to change the borders. It was an existential war. It was a war to destroy the Jewish state and to make sure that it will not exist. During this war, of course, just like any other war around the world, especially one that is launched against a country trying to destroy it, and a group of refugees were created, Palestinian refugees that lived in this area, that actually participated in the war against the Jewish state. Many of them left. Many stayed, and until today we have actually Israeli Arabs that are what some will refer to as Palestinians. 20%, I believe, of the Israeli population are Israeli Arabs that have equal rights in the Jewish state. It's actually the only place in the Middle East that Arabs have equal rights and true sense of democracy. So we hear a lot about that, but one story that is not being heard and actually deafening silent from the international community is the story of the Jewish refugees from Arab countries. We're talking about a group of between 850,000 people to 1 million people Jews that lived in Arab countries. We're talking about the indigenous people of the Middle East, people that lived there for ages, that were oppressed so much, and the oppression has reached a point that they could not live. In Egypt, for instance, they were put on boats and had to live with one suitcase in their hand. Really felt a sense of pressure that led them to leave. And the only place that would take them, 1950, 1940, it wasn't a time that America opened the gates for immigrants from the Middle East. The only place that would take them was the Jewish state. So although, as many times I hear, especially on social media, on the internet, that Jews were happy to live in Arab countries, but it's not the true story. I can share my family, personally, my family is from North Africa. My father's side of the family came to Israel in the early 50s from North Africa. They, again, it's indigenous people, and I think that what hurts me the most is the fact that it's a culture that has been lost. I see pictures of my grandparents wearing indigenous customs from Tunisia that they used to wear for Jewish holidays, and all of these customs, everything they had to leave behind. When asking my grandmother from Tunisia about why they left, she said, that we were always treated nicely. And when I'm asking what nicely means, she says, we were Jews in an Arab country. We weren't Muslims, so we weren't equal. We were always below second-class citizens. When the Vichy regime, the French regime, was controlling Tunisia during World War II, they had to work in forced labor camps and wear a yellow star like their brothers, the Jews in Europe. But they always had to live in this oppressive reality that led in 1951 for them to just say, we can't live this way anymore, and they had to live with nothing. So it's not just the property that was stolen, it's not just the land that was stolen, it's the culture, and it's even a unique language. And it's my family from my father's side. My family from my mother's side came to Israel from Iraq. In Iraq, there was a population of 150,000 Jews, 150,000 people that lived there for ages. Once again, it's a community that's so ancient that we're talking about people that lived there from the time that Iraq was Babylonia, and then from what they call Babel, and they came there from Judea, from what we know today as Israel. They were expelled from Israel to Babylonia, and Babylonia turned into Iraq, and then they were expelled again. A community that is restless, never finding a refuge. Actually, my grandmother told us the story. My grandmother from my mother's side always told us how she fled Iraq in 1951. She was in her 20s. They lived in Baghdad. They live actually near the main square in Baghdad, and she's coming back home one day. Again, the stories about the oppression and how they always lived as second-class citizens, even third-class citizens, compared to, she always said that some dogs were treated better. And now she returns back home one day to look for her dad, my great-grandfather. And she had a 2-year-old baby, my uncle, Itzik. She's going up the stairs to look for her dad, and she can't find him anywhere. She's approaching the window, and she's looking down to the square, and she sees bodies hang on poles, and she recognized the faces. It's a Jewish community that was executed, some of her friends, people that she knows from the community, but she also recognized the face of her dad, my great-grandfather, that was executed that day. He was accused of being a Zionist spy, and that's why he was executed. For my grandmother, this was the last straw. She knew she had to leave, because if her dad is executed, she will be next. So she took some photos, she took some money, she hid at the neighbors for a few days, and when it was safe, she left. And I think the only place again that will take her was Israel. And although many say that the Jewish population, the million Jews that lived in the Middle Eastern countries, not all of them were Zionists. It's correct. They weren't, they did have They did have inspiration to come to Israel. It's part of the religion, of the Jewish religion. But the organized Zionist movement was very weak in Arab countries, actually. But they were expelled. They were subject to such enormous pressure that they had no choice but to leave. And they always praying to come back to Jerusalem. They always pray to come back to Israel. But the idea of Zionism didn't came to those Arab countries until the 40s and the creation of Israel, and then they knew that there's a place for them to go to.
These are primarily, so this is where probably Israel gets, I hope I'm not mixing groups up here, but this is where the Sephardic population of Israel mostly comes from.
That's correct. Actually, today, 55% of Israeli Jews are Jewish refugees from Arab countries, are Sephardic, or some call them Mizrahis, but Jews that came from North Africa, and from the Middle East.
Okay, and essentially this persecution started around, you say, around 1941?
It started around 1941. The organized prosecution, but for years before that, they lived as an oppressed minority in those countries because there were Jews living in Muslim countries, Arab countries. Then many times the law was prohibiting them from practice jobs that are saved for Muslims, or this kind of things that for ages that was the case, and they accepted it because there was no Jewish state, there was no place for them to go.
So this is similar to, like we hear, these areas have been taken over by ISIS.
That is correct, yeah.
The non-Jewish population, primarily Christian, but also other groups, they have to pay, what's it called? They have to pay zagat, the tax, and they cannot hold any positions of authority within the community.
Exactly. They are what is called in Arabic dhimmi. Dhimmi is status of sponsor. They need to pay tax. They need to pay tax for who they are to the government.
Okay, as opposed to the Arab population in Israel, which they can partake in anything in the government.
Not only can they partake, there is Arab parties. Actually, in the last election, the justice that oversee the election was Justice Salim Jubran, an Israeli Arab. That is one of the few judges in the Supreme Court in Israel, an Arab Israeli. Which is, of course, not the case and will probably never be the case in Arab countries in the Middle East, where a Jewish person will be able to be judge or to practice in law and then become one of the Supreme Court judges in a country, in an Arab country.
Mm-hmm. Now, why is it, do you think, because I know there's a lot of people out there that, you go on the internet and you're going to find people talking about Zionist conspiracies and stuff like that. It's almost like any article that deals with Israel, you look at the comment section underneath, and you have this kind of stuff being brought up. But yet, it seems that there's not that much knowledge about these events you're talking about, but there's a lot of knowledge about all these. It seems like it would be a very hard way to have a conspiracy if the history seems not to be getting out of the alleged conspirators.
That's a terrific question. It's one that I ask myself every day. And that's why I'm working in this organization, in StandWithUs. That's what we do. We're trying to educate. I believe that, it's awful. It's such a wrong, a human wrong for the international community. It's something that we all should be ashamed of. And, but I would say I can't just accuse the international community. I think it's also those refugees. They were also part of the reason why the story is not told. When I remember talking to my grandmother and with both of them, they are such a strong two women, and they always said the most important thing for us was to come to a place that we can have a better future, that we can live freely, and finally we live as free people, we live as human beings. And they never used the word refugees. It was not in their lexicon. It was not in their in the way that they spoke about what happened to them. They came here with nothing, while the Palestinian refugees, when they left Israel to the Arab countries surrounding Israel, they were treated as refugees. They were put in refugee camps. They are still maintained as refugees. They are the only group of refugees that have a generational status. So if you are a refugee, your son will be a refugee. Even if he's born in Jordan, his son will be a refugee. His son will be a refugee. You can be 5 generations and still be a refugee, although you're not. I met a Palestinian refugee that goes to Yale. So, it's not what we have in mind when we think about refugees. While the group of Jewish refugees from Arab countries, this 850,000 people, 2 million, that when they came to Israel, Israel didn't put them in refugee camps. They put them in ma'abarot. Ma'abara in Hebrew means a transit camp. They were transited into the Israeli society. They received citizenship. Israel has put a lot of effort, a lot of resources to combine them into the Israeli society. I'm not saying that it was perfect. It was far from perfect, but Israel put a lot of effort to make them into this new society from this backward culture that they came from, which ended up with them becoming an integral part of the Israeli society. And this is the main difference, and I think this is why we don't hear about it enough. And that not goes to say that they don't deserve to be talked about. I think it's the most important thing. And actually today, June 1st is a day that in the United Nations, it's the first time that the Farhud will be recognized. The Farhud is the violent dispossession that was carried out against the Jewish population of Baghdad in Iraq. It happened in 1941 between June 1st and June 2nd. It was Shavuot, one of the 3 most important Jewish holidays, where over 1,000 Jews were severely injured. Around 200 were killed, brutally killed. And if I have a moment, I would like to read a short quote from one of the testimonies of the Farhud. Can I do?
Oh yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
As Baghdad burned, the Jewish existence became smoke spears against the sky. Jewish shops and homes were looted and then tortured. A synagogue was invaded, and its Torah burned in the classic Nazi fashion. Yet British troops remained minutes away, under orders from London not to move unless fear of Arab incitement against the oil infrastructure. Baghdad became a fast-moving hell. Frenzied mobs raced throughout the city and murdered Jews openly on the streets. Women were raped, their horrific families looked on, infants were killed in front of their parents, homes and stores were emptied and then burned. Gunshots and screams electrified the city for hours upon hours. Baghdadians sliced open babies, horrid torture, and multitudes the white spare. It's a quote from one of the testimonies of that day, and I'm sorry for my English. By the way, English is my 3rd language. My first language is Arabic, and second language is Hebrew is English. English is my 3rd. But this is one of the testimonies from Baghdad, and it's such an horrific story, but it's one that we don't hear about at all. And it's and the Farhud, this massacre of the Jews of Iraq, will finally be recognized by the United Nations. And I think that it's a small step towards real justice of this community that lost billions of dollars in property, in land, that we will never receive. We'll never receive it back. But it's just a small step in the way, but it's the right way. That this is one of the issues that need to be talked about.
Yeah, it should be noted too, right, that during the early 40s, Britain was trying to kind of keep a certain level of alliance with the local Arab populations because they were fighting in Europe. And if people migrated, for instance, from Europe into Israel, then there was a lot of protest in the local Arab community because they felt like they were kind of being invaded. And so many of the boats and stuff were turned back, weren't they?
Yeah, this is correct. They were turned back, and um, the the British government, the British Army, stayed silent, as I read in the testimony, that while they saw that a real atrocity. I mean, people being brutally killed, and they can't do anything. They can, but they don't. And again, it's an awful history. I'm sure it's again a very inconvenient truth about the Jewish population in the Arab countries. But what is more inconvenient is the fact that the West knew, and the West saw it, the British government and others in North Africa. They knew what's going on. They knew how oppressed the Jews are, and they were silenced. And unfortunately, I think that we see history kind of repeat itself. They say that on Friday they came for the Jews, but then on Sunday they come for the Christians, and that's what we see today with ISIS and across the Middle East. A Western deafening silence while minorities are being killed and brutally oppressed, and the response is so weak, and that's it. My grandmother used to say that we always say never again, but it's happening over and over again for other groups, and it's unfortunate, but this is the reality today, that the word after World War II, after the Holocaust, said that never again would Jews be prosecuted, never again will minorities be prosecuted. So many international laws and international conventions and rules of engagements and how to partake in war, which is being completely ignored by this terrorist fundamental groups, extreme jihadist and terrorist group that are brutally oppressing minorities while the word is silenced. And it seems like never again is happening again. And it seems like more than anything that the Zionist movement was right. Because when I'm trying to imagine the world today without Israel, I mean, it's a terrible reality that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, backing up just a little bit there, that I think I read an article about some representative from the World Jewish Congress that was actually trying to put light on the plight of the quickly vanishing Christian population of the Middle East. I mean, it's being pretty much decimated. If the people are either killed or they have to flee. And of course, when they have to move away from their countries, then their culture is lost, which I think sometimes people forget that it's hard to maintain your culture as an Iraqi Christian if you're suddenly living in London. It's very difficult. But we're hearing never again, but it seems that we hear a lot more that, blatant examples of anti-Semitism that you would not have heard about 10 years ago seems to be kind of creeping into the culture. And not like, organized mobs of, KKK or something like that, but just like what I said a few minutes ago, that a lot of commentary on the internet and stuff and social media is really focused negative to Israel, and I don't see a balance in that respect. I don't see lots of people saying, well, now, wait a minute. What do you think is behind this, and what can be done about that? We're not talking censorship or anything, but there is. If you only hear one side, you're going to, obviously, you're going to think, well, these are the bad guys and these are the good guys.
The situation today on the internet and social media is terrible. Of course, there's asymmetry. There's maybe 14 million Jews around the world, 6 million of them are in Israel, and there is 1.3 billion Arabs, I believe, in throughout the world. And I'm not going to say that, of course, there's a lot of Arabs and Muslims that are supporting Israel and that are moderate and want peace and don't think that Israel should be destroyed. But unfortunately, the majority is against Israel, and there's asymmetry in the numbers there. So it's really difficult for us to fight. And it's just terrible. I think the worst thing is that today I see that Jew hatred has been very, it's very politically correct. Today it's the most politically correct hatred. You cannot talk about radical Muslim terrorist groups because then you will be accused in Islamophobia. But as soon as you'll say to someone that he is obsessed with the Jewish state and that it might be anti-Semitic, you'll be called out for using the anti-Semitic card and talking about things that you shouldn't talk about. There's a taboo to speak about hatred to Jews, and it's terrible. Working for this organization, many times I'm going on college campuses, oftentimes in the U.S., and I see this growing movement of usually I'm sharing my story of serving in the Israeli army, in the humanitarian unit of the Israeli army. And I just see hatred. I see people, calling me terrible names, saying horrible things. And it's legitimate because it's against Israel. And I think that today Israel has replaced the Jewish people. It's the Jewish nation. And although many of the people that criticize Israel are really doing it from they're not all anti-Semites. I think Professor Ellen Dershowitz once said that if critics of Israel if every critic of Israel would be called anti-Semite, Tel Aviv would be the place with the highest population of anti-Semites, because in Tel Aviv people are very critical of Israel. So you can be critical of Israel, but we see this obsession that. From what we saw with FIFA just recently, when the FIFA, the soccer football group had to face the Palestinians in this group has to boycott Israel, and then in the last moment they changed their mind and said that they don't want to ask Israel. There was a massive attack. I mean, there was protesters outside of the FIFA meeting and inside breaking in. I mean, it's this sort of fanatism. It's football. That's what we're talking about, and you still see this fanatic, this obsession with the Jewish state. And for me personally, I mean, it's becoming more and more popular. But people that always stood in the right side of history, people that want to do what's right, need to stand up for Israel, because many causes in the history of mankind were not popular. I mean, opposing slavery was not popular in the beginning. The civil rights movement, I mean, to oppose the Nazis in Europe was not popular in some time. But it's the right thing to do, and people of goodwill, people that want to stand on the right side of Israel, on the right side of history, should stand with Israel, because I think that's the modern day we shall overcome. It's that we shall overcome with the Jewish people, and we should all stand together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you tell a little bit about how people could find out more about your organization? Because I'd never heard of it before, just like a month and a half ago when I got it.
Sure. So we're very active on social media. I think that's one of our biggest strengths. We have pages in 12 languages. We actually have a page in Arabic as well that is doing very well. So you can look us up in every social media outlet. From Facebook, you can look up Stand With Us, and there's a lot of interesting posts there, and on Twitter. Otherwise, we are also, you can send us a note through the Facebook page, and ask us how you can be active in your community or in your area. We're always looking for volunteers. We also have a website that you can put your email there and get information from us. It's standwithus.com. And personally, if you want to speak to me or engage in a dialogue with me, I mean, I'm available on Twitter. It's Hen Mazzig. It's HenMazzig. And we are more than happy to help and assist everyone. I mean, there is so much to do, and we really need whoever can help us.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you'd like to leave with the listening audience besides just how to get involved, but just one last thing that can kind of say, you should think about this or consider this?
Um, I mean, I grew up in Israel not knowing that there is any problem with Israel. I never thought that there is a world movement against us. And Israel is doing well today. I think that Israel is doing very well economically and in security, although we live in a tough neighborhood. But it was just shocking to see how much hatred there is out there for Israel, and for me to, I completely changed my life to choose a career that it's not really a career, it's just something that I'm passionate about, and I want to help Israel, but it's not just about Israel. It's about about real hope, and I think that the strongest thing that Israel has and that Israel used throughout the years since our existence until today is hope, is to maintain this hope for a better future and to never lose hope, and celebrate life while people around us celebrate death. And if there's any hope for the Middle East, it will come from this small country, the only democracy in the Middle East, the only place that offers freedom for Muslims, for Christians, for every minority. And if you want to support this, and if you believe in those values of freedom and equality and celebrating life and maintaining life and protecting life, Israel is the cause that you need to care about the most in the world, in the Middle East. And thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Hey, thank you for coming on. I learned a whole bunch, and now it's just got me wanting to go out there and start researching some of the interesting items of history and politics that you've brought up. So again, thank you very much for sharing your time with us, Hen. That was a very interesting first half hour of the show with Hen Mazzig discussing history of Jews in the Middle East and how, history has kind of ignored the persecution that was taking place and the expulsion from their homes that the Jews were subjected to back in the 1940s. Everyone's thinking about what happened in Europe, but not what was happening in the Arab countries. And I think it's very important to keep these things in mind. And I want to divert a little bit away from Israel, though, and the Middle East, and connect this to the idea that I think people get very comfortable with the way society is. They get very comfortable with the idea that, well, this is the way it was yesterday, this is the way it is today, and this will be the way it is tomorrow. And those people that lived in those Jewish communities that were subjected to so much persecution in the 40s, to the point that they were finally thrown out and had to migrate to Israel. The thing is that these communities had lived in these countries for thousands of years. All right? And then all of a sudden, whammo, things change. Now, there's a lot of reasons for it. We could go into history about why events took place that all culminated, got everything focused on that particular population in the 40s. But what I want to do is connect this to a couple emails I received. Now, this may sound this may sound like I'm veering off topic even again, but I'm not. And I received a couple emails in reference to my book series, Freedom from Conscience. And someone was asking about the third book. They had read the description. And the one, Freedom from Conscience, Deliverance from Evil. And they asked me, because they hadn't read any of the books, they asked me, are you trying to glorify psychopaths? Are you making psychopaths into the heroes, the persecuted minority that needs to step forth and save the world? And the answer to that is no. It really is a no. The thing I want to point out is that the character, even though she's a young psychopath, and of course in the first couple books she starts out being a vigilante serial killer, going after people that have really done nasty things to other people and have gotten away with it. And the thing is that what I chose to do by making such a character is it allows a person to be able to explore psychology, philosophy, and sociology from kind of a clear perspective. Because, see, a psychopath is not clouded by emotions. They're not, not normally very susceptible to sentimentality. They are very cognitive oriented. They're very able to look at an issue kind of in a cold, calculating way, very similar to, Mr. Spock on Star Trek. And the thing is that what separates them perhaps from people that have Asperger's is that the Asperger person can feel deep emotions. They have a hard time expressing them, and therefore they have a hard time reading other people's emotions as well. Whereas a psychopath can, they don't really experience very deep emotions, except perhaps around very, very, very close family and so forth. But the thing is that they can read it in other people and mimic it very well. So they're able to know when someone's sad or happy or whatever and be able to act accordingly if they have a goal in mind. But the thing is, what I wanted to do with the third book was deal a lot with this whole idea of a developing dystopian future. And the idea that at any given time, society could collapse. That everything we took for granted now could end tomorrow. And then where would we be? So the plot, without giving too much away in Deliverance from Evil, is that our character, who's been so strong in the series, the first two books, and has led somewhat of a charmed life, although has experienced some tragedy, is suddenly thrust into a situation where they become the victim. They're kidnapped by an individual who is, I don't want to use the word, prepper, but more in the lines that, maybe Charles Manson, how he thought that society would collapse and that people would come to him at the end to become, they wanted him and his family to become the rulers of this devastated society. Well, in this particular book, what you have is that without this guy knowing that this person's a serial killer, has kidnapped her, and his goal is to make her his apprentice. And the thing is that throughout the book, he describes his vision of the cities collapsing, the people rushing out into the suburbs, and basically somewhat of a Walking Dead sort of scenario, where only the strong survive, and initially you just have utter devastation unless you're prepared for this sort of thing. And of course, he's got lots of food and weapons and so forth stored. He, though, is also a serial killer. And his way of getting back at God for tragedy in his life is to show that he has more power than God. I mean, he goes out and kills God's creations. And so what you have there, in a sense, is the main character, Melanie Lindbergh. She is kidnapped. Just before she's taken a shower, she's suddenly confronted with this guy who's been hiding in her basement. And he, at gunpoint, takes her to his lair out in eastern Oregon. And I think what I wanted to do there was symbolize the idea that everything you know could suddenly disappear overnight. You could have an economic collapse. You could have a war. I mean, take a look what's going on now with the United States and Russia. And now, it's like America doesn't have enough to bite off if it takes on the bear. It also wants to take on the tiger. It wants to go after China. And so American foreign policy right now is seeking to isolate and, prevent the growth of Russia and, of course, then its economic and military influence in Europe and the Middle East. At the same time, they're trying to prevent China from having any kind of influence in Asia and the Middle East. Now, of course, Russia is interested in the Middle East from a strategic standpoint, as well as alliances with countries they do business with, such as Syria, such as Iran. China depends on the Middle East. Traditionally, China's been very isolated and never really cared much about the Middle East at all. But when it industrialized, it needed oil. And so they get a great deal of oil from Iran. And so part of America's strategy, still rooted in some sort of crazy Cold War sort of thinking, Machiavellian, it's us against you versus, well, let's cooperate. The ultimate goal, I think, is to take down Russia and take down China. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to suddenly go in there and take over. Take a look at Libya. The United States went in, bombed the heck out of it, and just kind of left it there. And now it's a total mess. It's not even really a country anymore. And they want to do the same thing to Syria, but Assad has hung on a lot longer than the U.S. government thought he would. Of course, ultimately, I think the goal there is for the United States is for Syria to just turn into a huge mess, a bloodbath that could actually wind up exterminating a major genocide against the Alawite Shias and the Christian and other minorities and secular Muslims, they're Sunnis in Syria. And then at some point just say, hey, we got to come in here and do something about this. This is terrible. And then wind up, kind of in control of the region along with its allies, Turkey and Saudi Arabia. But the thing is, if at any time any of this goes wrong, if something bad happens, if we wind up with a major war, what happens then? We have a situation in which all of a sudden, we're not used to this idea of suddenly a major war. And I don't think America is in any way psychologically or financially or in any other respect ready for a World War III. And therefore, if something did happen, if something happened to disrupt the way things are, the way things just normally flow in the world, what happens then? Most people aren't self-sufficient in the United States. Most people don't know how to change a tire on their car. Come on. Most people wouldn't know how to grow a tomato if you gave them the seeds and the instructions. They wouldn't know how to plant. They wouldn't know how to do anything like that. I mean, think about a total economic collapse. Think about what happens when we don't have an economic collapse. Think about Christmas sales where people get trampled to death, because people are trying to get a half off on, I don't know, women's underwear or something like that. And think about what happens if instead there's no food. Okay? And that's the scenario I tried to get at. And so you get this dialogue, even though the main character is subjected to months of rigorous brainwashing techniques, actually very similar to the ones that were pointed out that the U.S. government uses. They paid a whole bunch of money for, and I had my rough draft done for that book long before that was leaked. So they could have come to me. I don't know, or they read the book and got it for free, but they spent a lot of money for their techniques of breaking someone psychologically. But even after the main character is almost entirely broken psychologically, she's still able to communicate her ideas with this gentleman. As, they sit on the porch and he's training her, every day on how to survive in the woods, how to survive with alternative energy, how to basically become invisible but still live a pretty good life. And the thing is that you have this dialogue in which somewhat of a Nietzschean philosophy comes across. You get this sense of, what I try to promote at least, is a sense of questioning what is the individual's responsibility in society. I mean, what also is the level of individuality a person can really expect to live? Because you have one person that goes all the way. I mean, he preys on people. He also just doesn't want to be bothered. He's, just waiting for this apocalypse that he's sure is going to happen, and then he's going to come in and be a leader of some area of Eastern Oregon or whatever. Of course, his prediction being that, cities like Portland, San Francisco, Seattle would not survive such an apocalypse. You would have a situation in which the people in the cities would flock out into the countryside, but by the time they would make it out to a place like Eastern Oregon, they really would not have much of a chance. I mean, not very many would make it, and would probably be stopped by the people in the hinterland long before they would actually reach the really rural areas. But the thing is this. I'm just wondering, if we take a look at society today, if we take a look at modern America, if we take a look at, our institutions, what the heck is going on? I mean, seriously, what the heck is going on? You have a situation in which, there are Christians and other minorities being wiped out over in the Middle East right now. And I mean literally wiped out. People giving their lives. You don't hear about all that much unless there's some big event like, ISIS takes out, a couple dozen Christians on the beach and cuts their heads off. But it's happening every day. There's people being sold on, girls sold on slave blocks who, don't happen to be part of whatever group ISIS likes. And the thing is this. You have very little attention. Everyone's focused on freaking, trivial issues. Everyone's talking around the water cooler about Bruce Jenner. Okay? I mean, seriously, does a guy who is going through some sort of metamorphosis, is that so crucial that that's what everyone's head is focused on right now? Our collective unconsciousness is being, in some way, I don't know, it's being polluted by these trivial issues. These issues that have nothing to do with our survival. And, that's even in the national media. You take a look at local media in the United States. I remember the town I came from when you actually still received a newspaper back in the 1990s. And, there would be, the front page of the newspaper was what I considered the interesting part, because it had all the stuff about international events and things going on in Washington, D.C., and occasionally things going on, in the state, that were pretty big things. And do you know what was interesting? If you look at it now, most people don't even read newspapers. So if you go to the website of local newspapers now in the United States, often it's really trivial things. There's a lot of sports. There's a lot of entertainment stuff. If you do find something dealing with international events, it's like just maybe 3 paragraphs long. And you know why that is? Because the media and the people that kind of run it for profit have figured that the average American has an attention span of a goldfish. They can read about 3 paragraphs if they're committed to the story. And that's with a big picture on the, the page too. And now it's getting even less. I've noticed now you'll see, even in alternative media, you'll see a little tiny story and a whole bunch of tweets, which are basically sound bites sent out to everyone's, list that they have on, on their Twitter. By the way, anyone wants to get on my Twitter, it's a Psycho Mike, Okay, it's a little circle thing, and it's Psycho Mike. Now, the thing is that the population's getting dumbed down. Things are getting kind of out of hand, but maybe people just have been trained not to think about it. And this is why, for instance, my books are actually designed to answer that lady's email. The books are designed to get people to actually think. So seeing the world without the emotional filters that most people put up, without the glaze and glitz of modern society, in which there's a person very focused, non-emotional, but still with a lot of ethics and a sense of justice, who can think her way through this, this current state of affairs in the United States. And so, in a sense, the books are not actually books about a serial killer, really. I mean, that's part of, there's violence, and it's part of the plot. But it would be like if you had a book about George Washington, and then someone said, well, what's the book about? And said, it was about some people, the Americans fighting the British. It was talking about some battles. See, it's not the main thrust of what you would talk about. And that's not the main thrust of my work there. And again, it's not promoting a psychopath personality. It's just using that to be able to analyze where we are going in this society. And therefore, use someone who's a total nonconformist in order to say, wait just a minute, something is really, really wrong in the way things are. We don't have a media that's committed to informing. It's not committed to exposing things anymore. Just get their sound bites, usually from the government. We have, and that's the big media, the 95% that's owned by 6 corporations. We have an education system that is very strongly aimed at conformity. The first book really gets into attacking that for sure, because, it's set with the backdrop of her in high school. But the thing is, we have an education system that has many wonderful teachers. I mean, seriously, I don't get down on teachers. There's a lot of them out there that are doing their best to teach these kids. However, we also have an education system that you got things like, Common Core and things in which, come on, parents first of all, you'll have educational bureaucrats, again, not teachers, I'm talking about the administrators and so forth. They'll say, well, we need more parent involvement. And then when you do have a meeting in which people are talking about these so-called reforms, the administrators feel very threatened by that. They feel like, oh my gosh, how could these parents be coming in here? And there's been some cases where, parents have actually been threatened with arrest if they speak out too much or they take a little bit more time than they were allotted by the bureaucrats. And then at the same time, it's very strongly conformist. Have you ever asked yourself why it is that if you go into a school in a large high school in Maine, and you look at the culture, let's say you're like a sociologist and you're going in and doing an examination of high school culture, and then you go to a high school in, Washington State, you'll find it kind of is the same thing. The culture's the same. Now, why is that? Is that by coincidence, or is it part of the institutionalized structure? And if you are someone that's bullied, like the main character was originally in the series, if you are a student that's bullied for being different, who is there to blame? Maybe it's the actual institution itself that is to blame, and therefore needs to be exposed. So people can think about it. So people, especially that have children in the school systems, can think about what's going on. And then you have, what is it about religion in America? I center on this a little bit in the 3rd book. What is it about religion? I mean, again, you've got all these things going on in the country. You've got things, Christians being persecuted around the world. And, what do they talk about? It's kind of a feel-good thing. It's like taking a daytime talk show host spiel about whatever issue, adding some amens to it, and that's what religion has evolved into in the United States. So essentially, we do have a decline in culture. And that's what I was trying to get at in the third book. That, you've got to be prepared for this. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the ending is, but the thing is, eventually you do have a confrontation. Eventually you do have a rivalry that starts to grow between these two characters and also some other characters. But the thing is, people have got to be jarred into kind of thinking about these kinds of issues. Where are we going? What could happen? How would you feel if tomorrow, using the metaphor, someone grabbing you out of the shower and hauling you off into the desert to brutalize you? What if tomorrow everything just ceases to be what it was? And you've got to learn to survive in that kind of climate. Could you? Could you provide for your children and for your other loved ones? That's a question that maybe it's very important for everyone listening to actually ask themselves. Because maybe if you're unsure, then you need to start thinking about it. Because maybe tomorrow won't be as comfortable. 3 years ago, those people living in Syria, 3-4 years ago, had a nice standard of living, nice homes on the Mediterranean. It wasn't exactly the, shining example of democracy, but it was a stable government and a stable economy. And now it's chaos. If it can happen there, what's to say it can't happen here? And maybe that the main villain in the book I wrote, maybe the main villain has a point, at least when it comes to, your wanting to be prepared for the worst so that you can be ahead. Anyway, I just wanted to leave you with that thought. And I hope that you'll tune in next week for another episode of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.